the 2000s, I was offered a lot of low budget.
Remember the early 2000s, when Hollywood was convinced that star power alone could sell a movie?
I'm talking Britney Spears, mid-2000s, bald head, almost dropping the baby.
When studios thought slapping Eddie Murphy, George Clooney, or Nicole Kidman on a poster was enough to guarantee box office gold? Well, they were wrong. The 2000s weren't just about blockbusters like Spider-Man or Harry Potter. They were also an era of spectacular failures.
Well then.
Today, we're diving into 13 of the strangest box office bombs of the 2000s. The Truth About Charlie, 2002. Imagine trying to remake a Cary Grant classic, and then casting Mark Wahlberg as Cary Grant's replacement. That's exactly what happened with The Truth About Charlie, a baffling remake of the 1963 film Charade. Jonathan Demme, the Oscar-winning director of The Silence of the Lamb, was behind this project. Originally, he wanted Will Smith, but when Smith passed to make Ally, the studio went with Wahlberg, and that's when things went off the rails. Universal poured $60 million into the movie, but audiences weren't buying Wahlberg as a suave romantic lead. Critics destroyed it, calling the film awkward, lifeless, and miscast, an unthinkable loss. Demme followed it up with another remake, The Manchurian Candidate. But his career never fully recovered from the embarrassment of Charlie. But as bad as that was, another film that same decade made Wahlberg look like box office royalty in comparison. Body of Lies, 2008. Leonardo DiCaprio, Russell Crowe, Ridley Scott. On paper, that's a guaranteed blockbuster. In reality, it was a humiliating failure. Body of Lies was Warner Bros.' attempt to turn a modern spy thriller into a global event. They marketed it like it was The Dark Knight, buying ad slots during the Olympics, and banking on Scott's reputation. But there was a problem. By 2008, audiences were sick of war on terror movies. Despite a budget north of $100 million, the film tanked. It lost Warner Bros. At least $40 million. And even worse, was beaten at the box office by Beverly Hills Chihuahua. Yeah, you heard that right. A talking dog crushed Ridley Scott. To add insult to injury, DiCaprio and Crowe had a back-end deal that promised them 40% of the profits. Since there were no profits, that deal turned to dust. But believe it or not, some movies were such disasters, they didn't just lose money, they destroyed entire studios. Ballistic, X vs. Sever, 2002. This one is legendary. Not because it was good, far from it, but because it became infamous as one of the worst reviewed films in history. Starring Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu, Ballistic, X vs. Sever was a generic spy thriller with a techno-babble plot that nobody cared about. But behind the scenes, pure chaos. The movie was made by Franchise Pictures, the same shady company behind Battlefield Earth. The studio's boss, Eli Samaha, had a scheme. Inflate movie budgets on paper, trick investors, and skim the difference. For Ballistic, they claimed the budget was $70 million. Insiders say it was probably half that. When the movie bombed, Franchise got sued into oblivion. The studio folded by 2004, Banderas moved on, Liu survived, but director Waik Kayosayananda didn't work again for a decade. And if you thought that was bad, just wait, because some bombs didn't just embarrass studios, they humiliated actors at the peak of their careers. The Majestic, 2001. Jim Carrey was coming off The Grinch, one of the biggest hits of his career. Frank Darabont was fresh off The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. Together, they teamed up for what was supposed to be an Oscar darling, The Majestic. Carrey plays a blacklisted screenwriter with amnesia who winds up in a small town that mistakes him for a war hero. It sounds like a Frank Capra homage, but critics called it bloated, corny, and lifeless. Warner Bros. Did everything they could to hype it up. They held 500 sneak previews, but the buzz never came. And the timing was brutal. It opened the same weekend as The Fellowship of the Ring. But Carrey wasn't the only big name to stumble hard in the early 2000s. The Brothers Bloom, 2009. After breaking out with Brick, director Rian Johnson was given real money, $20 million, to make his next film, The Brothers Bloom. Starring Adrian Brody and Mark Ruffalo as globetrotting con men, it was supposed to be a quirky, stylish crossover hit. Summit Entertainment hyped it up at festivals, claiming it had mass appeal. But when it screened, audiences were divided. Some thought it was charming, others found it unbearably smug. The studio panicked. They delayed the release multiple times, then gave it a tiny rollout, only 209 theaters. Showtime, 2002. What happens when you blow half your budget on actor paychecks? You get Showtime. a buddy cop comedy starring Eddie Murphy and Robert De Niro. Murphy took home $20 million. De Niro got $17.5 million. That's nearly half the film's $85 million budget gone before filming even started. Warner Bros. Thought it was worth it. They delayed Pluto Nash just to give Showtime a clear runway, but then they released it against Ice Age and Resident Evil. Bad move. The film tanked, and worse, it kicked off a streak of disasters. Murphy followed it with Pluto Nash and I Spy. De Niro stumbled with City by the Sea, The Last Legion, 2007. This was supposed to be the next Gladiator. Instead, it was a lesson in how not to launch an epic. The Last Legion starred Colin Firth, Ben Kingsley, and a plot involving the fall of Rome, a boy emperor, and even a magic sword. Producer Dino De Laurentiis hyped it at Cannes in 2005. And Weinstein Co. bought it as part of their big comeback slate. But then came delays, and more delays. By the time it finally limped into theaters in August 2007, the Weinsteins were contractually forced to dump it with almost no marketing. Worse, it opened the same weekend as Superbad. The result? Obliteration. The epic sword and sandal film didn't stand a chance against a raunchy teen comedy. But hey, at least it got released. Some movies were so cursed, they barely made it through reshoots. Death to Smoochie, 2002. On paper, this sounded amazing. Robin Williams as a corrupt children's TV host, Edward Norton as his squeaky clean replacement, and Danny DeVito directing. A dark comedy about the seedy world of kids' entertainment. But on screen, total disaster. The movie cost $50 million and made less than $9 million. Worse, it helped bankrupt Film 4, the UK studio that co-financed it. Executives even nicknamed the production Death to Film 4, while it was still shooting, and they weren't wrong. Critics hated it, audiences stayed away. And speaking of strange flops, how about a movie that managed to both insult critics and offend audiences at the same time? The Legend of Bagger Vance, 2000. Robert Redford directing, Will Smith and Matt Damon starring, a prestige sports drama set in 1930s Georgia. What could possibly go wrong? Plenty. The film was slammed for avoiding real issues of racism, while also falling into the dreaded magical black man stereotype with Smith's character. Critics tore it apart, and audiences ignored it. The budget ballooned to $80 million, but the box office came nowhere close to covering it.
You don't do that to someone you love.
Imagine that. By the late 2000s, Eddie Murphy was in the middle of a brutal slump. After Meet Dave, Paramount pinned their hopes on Imagine That, a family comedy about a Wall Street executive finding success through his daughter's imaginary world. Murphy got $20 million for the role, but the studio had no faith. They quietly delayed the film, eventually releasing it in summer 2009, right up against The Hangover, Up, and Night at the Museum 2. The result? It face-planted out of the gate. Within 2 weeks, theaters were pulling it. The Affair of the Necklace, 2001. Fresh off her Oscar for Boys Don't Cry, Hilary Swank starred in a period drama about the French Revolution. Big sets, elaborate costumes, prestigious studio backing. It was supposed to be awards bait. Instead, it was a disaster. Directed by Charles Shire, best known for rom-coms like Father of the Bride, the film was lifeless and dull. Warner Bros. Barely even released it, just 18 theaters at first. Its opening weekend gross? A humiliating $125,000 total. The worldwide box office topped out at just over $1 million. Pride and Glory, 2008. A gritty New York cop drama starring Edward Norton, Colin Farrell, and Jon Voight. Sounds like a solid bet. But Pride and Glory became radioactive before it ever reached theaters. It had been in development since the late 90s, but after 9/11, nobody wanted a story about police corruption. The project was shelved, resurrected, and recast. By 2008, Warner Bros. Inherited it, but didn't want to release it. Only one executive pushed it into theaters, and unfortunately, it opened against Saw 5 and High School Musical 3. The Invasion, 2007. By 2007, Hollywood had already remade Invasion of the Body Snatchers 3 times, but Warner Bros. Thought, why not a 4th? They hired Oliver Hirschbiegel, director of Downfall, for a cerebral, psychological thriller. But when Warner Bros. Saw his cut, they panicked. They sidelined Hirschbiegel, brought in the Wachowskis to rewrite, and had James McTeague reshoot nearly 20 minutes of new action scenes. The result? A Frankenstein's monster of a movie. Nicole Kidman earned $16 million, but critics destroyed it. Warner Bros. Lost tens of millions, and the film was delayed so many times it finally limped out in August 2007, the same weekend as Superbad. Guess which movie audiences picked? So there you have it, 13 of the strangest, most humiliating box office bombs of the 2000s. In Hollywood, failure can be just as spectacular as success. Which of these disasters do you actually remember seeing? Thanks for watching.